Ryan Coogler is one of those directors who doesn't just make movies, he makes moments. Every one of his films, whether it's a quiet, grounded story or a full-blown blockbuster, feels like it's been crafted with intent. He doesn't just shoot scenes, he builds emotion. You can feel the weight of his characters, the humanity in his writing, and the pulse of his direction, all wrapped up in this poetic understanding of struggle, identity, and legacy. In just a handful of films, he's managed to create a filmography that feels more personal than most directors achieve in decades. There's this grounded confidence in his work, like he knows exactly what story he wants to tell, and how it should make you feel before you even see a single frame. And maybe that's why Ryan Coogler stands out so much. His movies don't just entertain, they mean something. Whether it's the raw pain and injustice that drives Fruitvale Station, the generational weight and rebirth in Creed, or the cultural power and spiritual depth of Black Panther, Coogler uses genre to say something deeper. He's a storyteller with a cause. Someone who understands that art and message don't have to fight each other. They can thrive together. There's always this heartbeat under his direction, a rhythm that's uniquely his own. Intimate, emotional, but unafraid to hit hard when it needs to. You don't just watch a Coogler movie, you live in it for a while. But let's not pretend like this video is purely academic, because truthfully, this ranking is kind of just an excuse to talk about Sinners. Easily one of the most fascinating things he's done yet. It's bold, heavy, and spiritual in a way that feels almost biblical. It's him stretching his voice into something cosmic and reflective, something that feels like the culmination of everything he's been building towards. So while I'm gonna talk about all of his films and rank them as fairly as I can, let's be real, this is really a love letter to Sinners and to the director who just keeps proving he's one of the greats of our generation. No surprise here, at number 5 we have Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. This film carries an undeniable emotional weight, one that's felt in nearly every frame. When it leans into that grief, when it pauses long enough to sit in the silence left behind by Chadwick Boseman, it finds moments of striking sincerity and power. There are scenes that feel almost therapeutic, not just for the characters, but for the audience too. Coogler's direction in those moments is deeply personal. You can sense him working through loss in real time, shaping pain into art. The film's best moments remind us why Coogler is so gifted at merging humanity with heroism. But as moving as Wakanda Forever can be, it's also pulled in far too many directions to fully land. The film has to juggle honoring a legacy, introducing new characters, expanding the universe, and setting up future stories. And in the process, it loses its rhythm. The pacing stumbles, the narrative shifts feel uneven, and the emotional through line gets diluted by the sheer weight of responsibility. It's a film that feels burdened by grief, by expectation, by obligation. Yet despite its unevenness, there's still something deeply admirable about it. The heart is absolutely there, and the performances carry it through. It may not be Coogler's sharpest work, but it's one of his most personal, and that sincerity gives it a quiet power. What else can be said about this one? Black Panther isn't just a superhero movie, it's a cultural milestone. Coogler took the framework of a Marvel film and transformed it into something mythic, something that felt alive with history, pride, and identity. The world building is rich and layered. Wakanda feels tangible, like a real place shaped by generations of culture and conflict. The story itself balances blockbuster spectacle with deeply thoughtful storytelling, exploring power, heritage, and what it means to lead. Every character from T'Challa to Killmonger has purpose and perspective, and the film's visual design, costume work, and Ludwig Göransson's stunning score combine to create one of the most immersive cinematic experiences of its decade. It's confident, ambitious, and unapologetically distinct, a film that redefined what superhero movies could say. That said, time hasn't been entirely kind to it. On rewatch, the cracks in the visual effects become hard to ignore. The CGI in the third act in particular is noticeably rough and occasionally distracting. It doesn't ruin the film, not even close, but it does undercut some of the emotional weight that the writing and performances work so hard to build. Still, even with those flaws, Black Panther remains one of the most memorable films in the entire MCU. Its themes, its cultural resonance, and its sheer sense of purpose have cemented it as something far bigger than the sum of its parts. A landmark not just for the franchise, but for modern cinema as a whole. Creed is a film that, by all accounts, probably shouldn't have worked as well as it does. Legacy sequels and spin-offs have a tendency to lean too hard on nostalgia, using familiar names and imagery as a crutch rather than a canvas. But Coogler didn't just revive the Rocky franchise, he reimagined. Creed feels alive, immediate, and deeply personal. Not just a continuation, but a rebirth. The way Coogler approaches the story of Adonis Creed feels authentic and emotional in ways that go far beyond boxing. You feel every punch, every doubt, every moment of pride, because the film isn't really about fighting, it's about proving to yourself that you belong. What's remarkable is how Coogler threads together the old and the new so seamlessly. The respect for the original series is clear, the echoes of Rocky's underdog spirit are all over this film, but it never feels weighed down by it. Instead, it uses that legacy as emotional fuel, grounding Adonis's journey in themes of identity, purpose, and ownership. The dynamic between Adonis and Rocky gives the film a soul that most legacy sequels can only dream of. Coogler captures the grit of the sport, but also the poetry of mentorship, the generational bond between student and teacher, and what it means to build your own story from the shadow of someone else's. Even if Creed 3 might hit a little harder or dig deeper for me, the original Creed remains extraordinary in how effortlessly it balances reinvention with its reverence. It's intimate but electric, raw but deeply heartfelt, the kind of film that proves Coogler's instincts as a storyteller are second to none. He turned what could have been a tired franchise extension into something powerful and soulful, setting the standard for every legacy sequel that followed. Honestly, this is one of those films that's incredibly hard to talk about. Not because there's some twist to avoid or plot to preserve, but because what it depicts is real. It happened. The story of Oscar Grant isn't one that can be spoiled, and yet watching it unfold still hits like a punch to the chest. From its opening footage to its final moments, Fruitvale Station carries a weight that's almost unbearable at times. Coogler's approach is stripped down and empathetic. He doesn't sensationalize or dramatize, he observes. And through that quiet observation, he crafts something that feels deeply human and profoundly tragic. It's the kind of debut that immediately announces a filmmaker with a voice, with conviction, and with the ability to make something intimate feel universal. Technically, the film is brilliant in its simplicity. The cinematography, shot on 16mm, feels tactile and raw, pulling you directly into Oscar's world. That visual texture gives the film an almost documentary-like quality. The grain, the handheld movement, the closeness, all of it works to dissolve the barrier between the viewer and the subject. It's immersive without being showy, and in a way, it reminds me of a certain cinema verite quality that I've grown to really admire lately. Films like Guy and Madeline on a Park Bench, or The Pleasure of Being Robbed, share that same naturalistic quality, that sense that life is simply happening in front of you, unfiltered and unforced. Coogler taps into that beautifully, allowing even the smallest moments, a laugh, a hug, a shared glance, to carry immense emotional power. But what makes Fruitvale Station so devastating is the tension that builds beneath the ordinary. Coogler fills the film with small joys, everyday conversations, moments that feel safe and familiar, and yet you know what's coming. Every smile carries an ache. The dread isn't loud or obvious, it's unseen, creeping quietly into the background until it's too close to ignore. You find yourself caught between wanting to savor these happy moments and wanting to look away, because you know how it ends. That duality, the beauty of life and the brutality of injustice, is what makes the film so powerful and so difficult to sit through. In the end, Fruitvale Station is a film that doesn't just tell you a story, it confronts you with it. It's a modern tragedy presented with honesty and care, and it shows exactly why Ryan Coogler became such an important voice in modern cinema. This isn't just an impressive debut, it's a statement of empathy, one that lingers long after it's over. Watching it feels less like viewing a movie and more like witnessing a life and losing it. And I don't think anyone will be surprised by this. Sinners! After seeing it 3 times, I can safely say that this is one of my favorite films in recent years. It's a shocking, overwhelming experience that had me completely entranced from the first frame to the last. The cinematography is jaw-dropping, some of the most breathtaking visual storytelling I've ever seen, and every composition feels loaded with meaning. The way Coogler and his DP use light, texture, and framing turns the screen into a living canvas, evoking both myth and memory. It's one of those films that feels monumental, like you're watching a director operating on an entirely different wavelength. But I'll say this, Sinners truly only works in IMAX. Much like Dunkirk, the home viewing experience does not quite capture its scale. The aspect ratio shifts can be distracting, especially when the standard format can't match the grandeur of the 1.43:1 IMAX presentation. If you were lucky enough, like I was, to see it in full IMAX, you'd know how transformative it was. It's immersive in a way that few films ever achieve, and I'm curious whether that will happen with Nolan's The Odyssey, being that film will be entirely IMAX for a change. On the writing side, Sinners is rich, layered, and profoundly introspective. It questions what it means to be a sinner in a society where morality is often defined by systems of power, systems that are themselves corrupt or oppressive. Coogler isn't interested in the simple binaries of good and evil. He's dissecting how people justify their actions in the face of survival, guilt, and cultural erasure. It's a film that dares to suggest that sin is not always moral failure, but sometimes moral resistance, a refusal to conform to the rules designed to break you. That complexity makes it not only emotionally gripping, but philosophically resonant, the kind of movie that lingers in your head for days after. One of the film's key themes is the exploitation and commodification of Black culture. How art, spirituality, and identity can be twisted, sold, or sanitized for consumption. Coogler contrasts the raw authenticity of the blues played in the juke joint with the seductive, hollow promises of commercialization that threaten to consume that very soul. The tension between cultural preservation and assimilation forms the film's beating heart. What makes it even more compelling is that the villain isn't just a racist character, but a man trying to rebuild his own broken community using Sammy's music as a bridge to reconnect with the ghosts of his past. That moral ambiguity, that empathy for all sides, is what elevates Sinners from a great story to something mimic. Identity sits at the core of everything here. The film explores how people define themselves, how they inherit or reject the identities forced upon them, and how ancestral wisdom offers strength where modern institutions fail. Through storytelling, music, and spiritual ritual, Coogler paints a portrait of a Black community that endures. Scarred but unbroken, resilient through creation and faith. The film doesn't just depict culture, it embodies it, using rhythm, sound, and silence to speak truths that can't always be said aloud. It's an act of remembrance, resistance, and reverence all in one breath. If I had one small critique, it's that the middle section, particularly the barn sequence where they're trapped and forced to fight their way out, dips a little too close into standard horror territory. It's the one stretch that feels slightly less inspired than the rest, a brief detour into convention before the film returns into its higher calling. But even with that, the final act more than redeems it. The ending is extraordinary, haunting, transcendent, and deeply moving. It's Coogler working at the peak of his powers, fusing visual poetry, historical commentary, and raw emotion into something unforgettable. Sinners isn't just a great film, it's a defining one. A piece of cinema that will be studied, dissected, and cherished for decades. This is the kind of work that reminds you why movies matter. And that's the list. Ryan Coogler's filmography, ranked from the heartfelt to the historic, from the raw beginnings to the absolute mastery. What's so special about Coogler is that every film he's made feels personal. Even the biggest, most commercially successful ones carry that same emotional fingerprint he started with back in Fruitvale Station. He's one of those directors who never loses sight of the human heart beating beneath the spectacle. Whether he's telling stories of legacy, loss, or liberation, there's always meaning behind the emotion. And if Sinners is any indication of where he's headed, we're witnessing a filmmaker in the middle of his prime. Someone who's only going to keep redefining what modern cinema can be. Coogler's work bridges worlds, mainstream and independent, intimate and epic, spiritual and political. He's not just making films anymore, he's building mythology. That's it, and until next time, keep watching movies, keep noticing the little details, and remember, you can like this movie as long as you're not Christian.
Sinners. How many of y'all went to see the movie Sinners? Shame on you.
No.
We don't